From Philharmonic Hall in Lincoln Center, home of the world's greatest musical events, another program of New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts, under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein. And here is Mr. Bernstein.
Pretty spooky stuff. And it's spooky because those sounds you're hearing come from the first psychedelic symphony in history. The first musical description ever made of a trip, written 130 odd years before the Beatles, way back in 1830 by the brilliant French composer Hector Berlioz. That's Berlioz, the Z is pronounced. He called it Symphonie Fantastique, or Fantastic Symphony, and fantastic it is in every sense of the word, including psychedelic. And that's not just my own idea, it's a fact, because Berlioz himself tells us so. Just listen to these first two sentences of his own program note that he wrote describing the symphony. Quote, "A young musician of a morbidly sensitive nature and a feverish imagination poisons himself with opium in a fit of lovesick despair. The narcotic dose, too weak to cause death, plunges him into a heavy sleep accompanied by the strangest visions, during which his feelings, sensations, and memories are translated by his sick brain into musical thoughts and images." Unquote. Doesn't sound very different from modern days, does it? And we have every reason to suspect that the morbid young musician Berlioz is talking about is none other than Hector himself. He certainly did have fits of lovesick despair, we're told, and he was a creature of wild imagination, wild enough to have these visions and fantasies without taking a dose of anything. His opium was simply his genius, which could transform these grotesque fantasies into music. Now listen to the next sentence of that same program note. Quote, "Even the beloved one herself, the one who's made him lovesick, has become for him a melody, like a fixed idea which he hears everywhere, always returning." Unquote. A fixed idea, remember that. In French, idée fixe. In other words, an obsession. You all know what an obsession is. It's something that takes hold of your mind and won't let go. Well, in this symphony, the obsession is Berlioz's beloved, she who has made him so desperately lovesick. She haunts the symphony. Wherever the music goes, she keeps intruding, interrupting, returning in endless forms and shapes. So you can see that if we're going to understand anything about this weird symphony, the first thing we have to know is that idée fixe melody, the theme of the beloved, and be able to recognize it each time it appears, no matter how it's disguised. Here it is, or at least the first phrase of it. That's the first phrase. Can you hear the lovesick yearning in that melody? The way it has a rising shape at the beginning, and then rising even higher, straining still further, and then even further, and then hopelessly collapsing. Isn't that a perfect musical picture of lovesick longing? Now listen to it again, this time letting it continue into its second phrase, and then its third, fourth, and so on, each time rising and straining further and further, and each time again falling back into despair. I'm sure that any of you who has ever had a crush on someone who didn't return your feeling will understand that passionate melody perfectly, and you can easily see how a lovesick musician could become obsessed by it. And if you understand that, you're ready to hear the symphony. Now, the first movement is subtitled Visions and Passions, and it all begins with a slow, dreamlike introduction, which we're going to skip since it only prepares the atmosphere for the entrance of that main theme. In other words, it paints for us the dreamy, romantic lover before the obsession hits him. But when it does hit, oh boy, well, just listen. Here's the end of the introduction as it leads into the first feverish outburst of the Idée Fixe theme, and listen for those psychedelic fireworks. You get what I meant by psychedelic fireworks? Those sudden flashes and changes of color, and the dazzling unexpectedness of those dynamic changes. You know what dynamic changes are, that is, changes from loud to soft and back again. There were dozens of them. And then when the theme came in, did you hear how those rising and surging phrases are each written with its own little burst of crescendo? And did you notice how Berlioz accompanies his melody? Very strangely indeed, with no accompaniment at all under the melody, but between the phrases, there were those jerky little figures in the strings. Did you hear them? Tzakum, 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 tzakum. And they're so uneven, they're always popping in where you don't expect them. Tzakum, 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 tzakum. And then the way the tempo is always changing, charging breathlessly ahead and then slowing up and then suddenly in time again. And suddenly slowing up again. You never know what's coming. I tell you, you can become a nervous wreck playing this symphony. But then that's what it is, a portrait of a nervous wreck. Well, by now you ought to have that theme down pat so that you can follow it in all its psychedelic disguises and developments through anxiety, jealousy, rage, despair, whatever. And the rest of this first movement is almost all such developments of the theme. Of course, we can't play you all of them, but let's have a couple just to see how they work. Here's one where the low strings take up that theme in a growling, menacing way, while over them the woodwinds and horns are heaving a series of heartbreaking sighs. This is a perfect picture of the agony of jealous rage. You hear how that worked up into a climax of anguish? But if you think that was anguish, listen to how it goes on. with the sighs growing into howls and the strings rising to hysterical shrieks. Now, that time he almost flipped his lid. This music sometimes comes dangerously close to the borderline of insanity. Every once in a while you think it may just go over the line, but it never does, because Berlioz is always in control, no matter how insane he seems to get. Now, just one more passage in this first movement, and this is the weirdest of all. This time the low strings are again moaning away on the Idée Fixe tune, only now in canon. You all know what canon is. I won't even explain that. With the violas imitating the cellos. And they sound together like a bunch of lovesick cattle. Here first are the cellos by themselves, moaning away. You know that tune. Now here are the violas imitating them. Now here they are together in canon. But all that is only the groundwork. Over it and above it rises a melody on the oboe, having nothing to do at all with the main theme. In fact, having nothing to do with anything much except maybe modern music to be written over a century later. This long melodic line in the oboe is one of those musical monuments in history, unlike anything else of its time, so weird that you can almost not tell what key it's in, or indeed if it's in a key at all. It's a marvelous representation of a sick, wandering mind, a desperate soul, but the mind that composed it was not sick. It was pure genius. Now listen to this mad oboe. Wow. Can you believe that that was written in 1830, only 3 years after the death of classical old Beethoven? Sounds more like 1930, as though it were by Hindemith or Shostakovich or somebody. And on that oboe goes, rising dizzily over the canon of those moaning strings here, soaring to a new climax of hallucination. And when it gets there, as you're about to hear, the whole orchestra joins in, including trumpets for the first time, with the Idée Fixe melody in full swing of triumph, as though Berlioz had at last conquered his mania. But alas, no, the madness takes hold again, dynamic flashes and all, and suddenly everything falls apart, and the music splinters like a smashed window, and finally dies away out of sheer exhaustion. In the final bars, we hear one last longing whisper of the Idée Fixe melody, and the movement ends with a few organ-like chords of religious comfort. Now here is that whole last section of this psychedelic first movement, starting with the mad oboe solo. End of scene one and end of dream one. Now a new dream, new scenery, an elegant ballroom, at first shadowy and gradually becoming lighter and brighter until we're in the midst of a brilliant party. And two harps now join the orchestra, which give a ringing shine to the music of course being a waltz, a charming, whirling French waltz. But after a minute or so, the tune changes mysteriously to what? Guess. The idée fixe, naturally. And there indeed is the beloved's face appearing and vanishing among the dancers. And the desperate lover reaches out for her, but she's never there. The more he reaches, the more she eludes him. Finally, the waltz hits its climax, and suddenly everything stops. Nothing is there but the tune, the obsession. And for a moment it seems possible that he will have her and hold her. But then the waltz world crashes in on him again. He is separated from her by all those thousands of waltzers whirling faster and faster around him, and he wakes up. Another fantastic nightmare. Now here's the entire second movement of Berlioz' masterpiece, the scene of the ball. You know, one of the most fantastic things about this fantastic symphony is that Berlioz was only a lad of 26 when he wrote this incredible new music. And I mean new. Try to think how amazing this Fantastique must have sounded in 1830, even after the wildest late works of Beethoven. This youthful symphony must have seemed to come from a whole other planet, a new world called Romanticism. For instance, take this third movement coming up, a scene in the countryside. Now, Beethoven had already written his scene in the countryside, the famous Pastoral Symphony, which you all know, with its shepherd calls and bird calls and murmuring brooks and raging storms. But they were nothing compared to this. For instance, Berlioz writes real thunder in his storm scene, using 4 different timpani players. That's something old Beethoven would never have thought of. And Berlioz shepherds don't just play their pipes. They play out a whole drama. Now, here's the idea of the drama. Our poor drugged lover is now dreaming his scene in the country, and for a moment, it's not a nightmare, but a peaceful dream of nature's beauty and repose. There's a shepherd playing to his flocks, who's answered by another shepherd way off on a distant slope. And this duet of the shepherds is somehow comforting to our hero's loneliness. There is human communication in the world, even if people are far away from each other. Now, let's listen for a moment to those 2 shepherds. Now, there's a romantic piece of tone painting. You can almost see the alpine countryside scene. And in this atmosphere, Berlioz's hero dreams peacefully for a long while. The birds call sweetly, and there seems to be hope. We're going to skip all that part. It's just too hopeful. But suddenly, the atmosphere changes. The skies darken, agitation seizes the music, and guess who appears, taunting him with her idée fixe melody, a wolf girl in sheep's clothing. Now, here is that moment of truth. What a nightmare. What a marvelous picture of panic and terror with that breathless panting as it gradually subsides. Well, now again there is some kind of peace and quiet, which we'll skip. Our dreamer seems to be saved again from his obsession, but Berlioz has another horror up his sleeve, the final page of the movement. In this one extraordinary page, He gives us a dramatic picture of the pain of loneliness that has probably never been equaled, not even by the most neurotic composers of our own century. And what happens is this, that shepherd begins his tune again, one phrase. We wait for the answer from his distant friend, but there is no answer. Instead, only a mysterious rumble of thunder. The shepherd tries again, another phrase, again, the hollow answer of thunder. And so little by little the scene dies. The shepherd gives up completely, the thunder fades away completely, and our dreamer is left alone with the terrifying silence of lovelessness. Scene 4, or fourth movement, change of scene, a new nightmare. In this dream, our lover, or our hero, is a murderer. And whom has he murdered? Yes, his beloved, naturally. And the scene is the place of execution. He must now pay for his crime at the guillotine. Now, this whole movement is a gruesome march, complete with the drums and brass of the execution squad. It's a great march, brilliant and horrible at the same time. At the end of it, our agonized dreamer arrives at the stake, bows his head to the blade. The music is by now savage, out of its mind, when suddenly, as happens in dreams, everything stops, and for one instant he sees or hears his beloved, the idée fixe, that melody, but only for an instant. And the familiar phrase hangs there in the air, in the clarinet, and bang, it's cut off along with the hero's head. There's a roll of drums, a blare of brass, end of nightmare. And here is the fourth movement, the march to the scaffold. Wait, it's not over yet. There's a fifth and final dream, which even tops that one. The Nightmare of the Witch's Sabbath. And this is the topper of the whole trip. The lover now is dreaming he is dead. In fact, he's attending his own funeral. But this is no solemn funeral. There are no holy words and no prayers. There are only the grisly shrieks of witches. And there is the blood-curdling laughter of demons and devils. And the diabolical dancing of Halloween hags and grinning monsters. And of course, who should be the chief witch? None other than that sweet little beloved of his, whose angelic melody is now transformed into a hellish, squealing ride on a broomstick. And then there are spine-chilling funeral bells. And there's a parody of the Dies Irae chant from the Mass for the Dead. And there's the writhing of evil snakes. and the rattling of skeleton bones, and much, much more. But I want to leave a little something for your own imagination. Now, all this horror builds up into a most brilliant ending, but brilliant or not, I'm sorry to say it leaves our hero still in the clutches of his opium nightmare. It's brilliance without glory. That's the problem. I can't honestly tell you that we have gone through the fires of hell with our hero and come out nobler and wiser, but that's the way with trips, and Berlioz tells it like it is. Now, there was an honest man. You take a trip, you wind up screaming at your own funeral.
From Philharmonic Hall in Lincoln Center, the third of this season's New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts, under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein, has presented Berlioz Takes a Trip. Heard in today's program were portions of the Symphonie Fantastique by Hector Berlioz, including the movements Visions and Passions, A Ball, Scene in the Country, March to the Scaffold, and Nightmare of the Witch's Sabbath. This program was recorded in Philharmonic Hall and was produced and directed by Roger Englander.